facilitate such an important panel. And I'd like to start first with thanks to the panellists, because, you know, there are a lot of countries around the world where having access like this, the opportunity to have a conversation with regulators, just would not happen. And I think it's one of the marvellous aspects of New Zealand that when we're facing challenges, when we're having conversations, we can continue to have that dialogue. But the first thing I'd like to do is to thank the three of you for your service to New Zealand. I think quite often when we in an industry association land and industry are often commentating and thinking about how to do things better, we sometimes can not take the time we should to celebrate those who are servants of the public. Here's Allan. That's all right. That's all right. Glad to have you here. I'm just paying tribute to you, the panel, Allan, and saying how wonderful it is to have a panel like this, because there'd be a lot of different countries where this sort of conversation wouldn't happen. But also, I think I would like to highlight some of the backgrounds of the panellists. You know, Vince, you've had a long history of public service, both in corrections and at MPI since 2008. Gráinne, with your wonderful mix of private sector, working in Bupa and other areas, I think that just makes you the absolute right person to head the Ministry of Regulation, and you know I'm a big fan of that. Allan, former CEO of Telstra Clear and PGG Wrightson. And Sam, your background with Fonterra before you've becoming DepSec at the Ministry for the Environment. And I think this has an impact, and I just wanted to emphasise that when you are looking at all the issues, you've walked in both worlds. You really do take time to deeply understand those issues. In terms of a first question, I'm going to throw to you, Gráinne, because you've done some marvellous work in the area of the agricultural and horticultural products regulatory review, and it's just such an excellent example of the work that is being done by the Ministry of Regulation to test some of the regimes we have to say are they fit for purpose in a modern world. And I'm wondering if you could give the audience some reflections of that review and where you see progress.
Thanks very much for that, Katherine, and thanks very much, everybody, for being here today. So I think we set up the Ministry for Regulation in March last year. And I suppose a couple of interesting things have been that 70% of the things that have been raised with us have not actually been raised by members of the public or businesses with government agencies ever. So I think that's a really good sign that, you know, people do want to raise challenges with regulation. However, I would like to let you know that we get probably as many requests for more regulation as we do for less regulation. And what I would say is we get a lot of requests for regulation to actually in a slightly anti-competitive way. So people want us to create more regulation to make it harder for other people to compete with them. You know, what we have to do as a ministry is obviously work through that huge volume of ideas that we get from the public and business. And when you have a new ministry, you don't have a clear work programme, you haven't done this before. And look, you know, APHANZ did a very good job on behalf of its members of presenting a very clear problem with a clear problem definition, articulating that much of that problem definition as they saw it was regulatory, but also indicating some of the value creation that could occur if a regulatory review was to be undertaken. And that really helped us to, A, know where to look, but also to get the ministerial buy-in. We have worked hard on all of our reviews to get ministerial buy-in from the start of the review, because actually it's the ministers, and I think you heard that from Sir Bill English, that need to help with the implementation of the review. So if you get them on board at the start, so we had Minister Simmons, Minister Hoggard and Minister Seymour. And look, when we kicked off as a ministry, people said, oh, it's just Productivity Commission Mark II. I would like to acknowledge that the Productivity Commission did absolutely marvellous reports. However, we have the opportunity of being independent but inside government. So we have worked very differently to the Productivity Commission, and I do, actually from the start of the review, we worked with all of our government colleagues who hold the levers, because they own the regulatory system. So what we wanted to do is say that a report would land and it would be the start of change, not the start of a conversation, which is often what happens with reports. And one of the things that we heard from APHANZ members and others in the sector was, look, you can do a review forever, but actually we do need change to happen. And therefore we did keep our review, it was quite tight in terms of time. If you think Productivity Commission reports often were 18 months, I mean, we started in August, finished in December. Look, I think sharing as we went along, sharing what we found, having it tested by our colleagues, by yourselves, by members of APHANZ. We also had it internationally reviewed at times, checked everything as we went along. It meant that we were able to land a report that I do think has contributed to the start of change, as opposed to just the start of a conversation. So thanks very much to my colleagues for helping with it, but also for all of yourselves for actually working with us. I see this as a very collective effort across both private and public sector.
And it is a collective effort. So to throw to you, Vince, in fact, Allan and Sam, in terms of the recommendations, thinking of the opportunities, how did you respond, and did you see any constraints?
Thanks, Katherine, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. As I think you said, it's in a small country you can get the regulators and those that, who produce products that are regulated together in the same room to listen to each other. We've welcomed the review and welcomed the recommendations. I mean, I'm responsible for the ACVM function, and in New Zealand that fits within a ministry for the primary sector, primary industries. So, we're embracing very strongly the government's growth in terms of objectives around doubling exports in the next 10 years. So we can see how access to these products in a timely fashion will make a big difference to the growth of the industry. So we're totally committed to that. So we were pleased to have the review. We're pleased to be actively involved in it. We liked the way in which it was done by Gráinne and her team. It was very open, transparent. She let the evidence lead her to where she finally made the recommendations. We think they're workable ones, and we're actively keen to get started. One thing I would say though, in addition to all that, regulators are not some big black, machine. It's not a computer that sits somewhere on the terrace. Actually, most of us are small teams of frontline staff who probably aren't paid anywhere near most what we are paid, who do a decent job, get up in the morning to do the best they possibly can. Very small teams. They work within a framework that's given to them. They don't get to choose that. They also don't get to take risks. It's us that take risks and politicians that take risks, that shift dials. The frontline staff who deal with those applications, that are managing those queues. There are a small number of frontline staff who are doing their level best. So throughout the review, I was very mindful of making sure that, their job, the care and the effort that they're undertaking, that we weren't distracted. It's important that they feel like they're doing a good job, and it's for us together to shift the dial and change things. They need to get on and do the work that they're doing. We had a good conversation earlier with Bill English about targets, and I found that a fascinating conversation. We've committed to some interim targets, and I would say the only way we're achieving that is by those frontline staff working overtime. They're working nights and weekends to achieve that until we get a system change that enables the system to work faster. So I just wanted a little plug for the people you often don't get to meet, who are doing the work behind the scenes. They're a small number of people. So thank you, Katherine.
Allan?
First up, I echo Vince's thanks to be here. I'd just start by acknowledging the work done by Ministry for Regulation in Gráinne. We really appreciated it, and the way in which it was approached. It was a lot of work, and I'm sure a lot of work for many of you as well. So I think everyone had a pretty fair hearing within the process. Our initial response was a bit schizophrenic. I mean, as a small agency with lots of pressure, I think we groaned and thought, oh goodness, how are we going to handle this? And then we sat back and reflected. We've waited 20 years for this, basically. The Has No Act is not fit for purpose. It's an old act, and it's never gained the priority over the decade or so I've been at the EPA, despite the best attempts by MFE on our behalf and ourselves to get on the parliamentary timetable. So it really has been a bit of a gift to us to get a chance to discuss some of the really important amendments. And the recommendations we welcomed, we think they're really great. About 3 in particular, I think are game changers for us and for you. The first is the temporary pathway approval. That's the first in the world. It will be quite hard to implement, so bear with us as we work through that. But if you've got a new active, we're trying to find ways to give you a temporary approval once the bill is passed, or amendments into the Act, so you can get the substance out there to use, and we can circle back and do the more heavy scientific lifting. The other one is relaxation of the ability to use international regulators. We put that in place under Minister Parker with MFE's help, but we had a few too many hooks in it, which made it quite difficult for us to be able to use. And in that context, I'd say regulators are servants of the legislation. We don't make things up. We have to read the legislation and keep to it in the mandate. So we're heavily reliant on our friends at MFE to be able to do it. The third game changer is the $10 million that Minister Simmons has secured for upgrading our ecotox models, $5 million per year. The project is already underway. We've had a team in Australia talking to the Australian regulator, trying to understand their models. Unfortunately, they're just heading into a major restructure, so that may be a bit more difficult for us to work with them. The big issue for the models is not the models themselves, it's the data that has to go into them, and we will have to contract out to GNS, NIWA, other CRIs to get data sets to be able to populate the models. But there are 3 big game changers, and we're really excited about those. So thank you.
Sam.
Thanks, Katherine. And thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to contribute to the discussion. Gavin and Liz.
Might hold your mic up a little bit.
Gavin and Liz, thanks for the invitation. I might just start with a reflection, first of all. Just an acknowledgement that I think APHANZ sector, actually Gráinne, your team as well, did a really good job, I think, in drawing out a couple of things that are really important. So first of all, the fact of how important it is to the sector, to farmers, orchardists, to have access to the right products, the right technologies, not just for the purpose of productivity, actually for problem-solving reasons. And I look after the climate portfolio, and I know that is going to continue to be a really important objective in that area. So I think that was a really important issue, priority that was drawn out through the work that APHANZ did, but also that MFR led. I think that the second thing is that, and this is an acknowledgement, I think, too, that there can be a sense of frustration where you feel like you're not quite clear how and when those decisions are going to be made and what the process is going to be and followed in order to make those decisions. And that does breed a sense of frustration. And I think we got that, and that came through quite clearly in submissions and in the conversations that different agencies have had and MFR had with stakeholders. So I think hopefully the set of proposals that have been agreed and all the recommendations are going to go some way, at least in addressing some of those issues. And sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable just every now and then to have a flag raised in respect to a system that you've got some responsibility for. Human nature not to feel a little bit of discomfort, but I think it's hard to disagree with some of the underlying issues that were being raised, and we've got a way forward, and I'm pretty confident it's going to make a difference. So we've got recommendations. Obviously, implementation now becomes super important, and I can assure you that this is a priority for MFE. It's a priority for Minister Simmons. I can assure you of that. So we know we need to follow through, and we know that there will be a sector, there will be an industry association, and there will be a sectors leaders forum who will be monitoring and scrutinising progress. So don't fret, rest assured we are onto that and have every intention of carrying through now.
I just wanted to come on to something that both Sam and particularly Allan mentioned around the legislative changes. So Allan talked about how the current legislation was out of date, but actually that's the framework in which we must act. And just to give you a bit of background, there are over 250 regulatory systems in New Zealand. There's a very significant amount of legislation in New Zealand. And this year there were over 250 legislative bids for 33 slots. And actually collectively, we as a team got an omnibus bill slot for your two pieces of legislation. So that was no mean feat. So, I mean, you won't have seen all of the work that we collectively did in the background to get that as a priority. And I know some feedback has come about, well, could we have the slot later because then we can get more things into it? So the answer is no. Okay, actually, you got a slot. It was blood on the walls. Take the slot, make the most of it. I'd just like to probably give some insight into and some experience I've had of legislation. It is really, really hard to get legislation updated. Okay, so that battle, that blood on the walls occurs on an annual basis. So please think about that when you are making submissions about what you want in those amendments. Because the more prescriptive you get, the less flexible your regulator will be able to be in the future when technology changes, when data changes, when the world changes. Because you put something in legislation, and we get this as the Ministry of Regulation lot, put it in legislation and tell people they must do it and then they'll do it. Well, I mean, like anybody who's got teenagers, telling people they must do things is never a way forward. Working collectively on a solution, making sure you've got a permissive piece of legislation that will allow you to adapt, that does not codify every single thing, that means that the frontline staff and Allan and Vince's teams don't have their hands tied and can be creative. So, I mean, I just want to say, make the most of that opportunity, but please understand that the more that you specify and codify, it might work now, but it won't be future-proof, and then you will need to get it revised again, and it'll be really hard to get another slot.
And I also celebrate the slot that you did get, because it is incredibly hard when there are competing goals for a government to find your way through that pipeline of the Parliament. Equally, Sam, I accept, and I think it's great that we can talk about sometimes a healthy discomfort when these things are raised, because that's how change happens. And I suppose as a business leader, I do find it concerning when I talk to the large firms and they start to say things like we're starting to test whether or not we come to New Zealand at all. And it's not just in products from this sector, but pharmaceuticals and others. the ambition for New Zealand, and I hear that from the comments that you've made, is to be competitive and to be welcoming. And also we need to understand that as a public servant, you are constrained by the law. So we're on the pathway to having that updated and amended, and that does take time and patience, I would argue. In terms of looking to other jurisdictions and other regulatory environments, how do you think we compare? And I know, Vince, this is your peer-to-peer with your colleagues around the globe. Can we share more from them? And what's the use of AI technology?
Big question, Katherine. How does New Zealand compare? At an outcome perspective, I think New Zealand compares very similarly to many other jurisdictions. But New Zealand does have some particular contextual features. I mean, looking at the area that we're responsible for, primary industries, and dairy is our leading industry, is our biggest company in New Zealand. So the sensitivity around food safety, the sensitivity around the end user, places a much bigger burden on regulators and more care, because we know that our food goes around the world, but countries test the hell out of our food, and if they find things, they lack understanding, and certain things can happen. We've experienced that in the past. So I think what makes New Zealand reasonably unique compared against other jurisdictions for our area is the place of trade. So extra care goes into the approval and the conditions around agricultural chemicals and compounds because of that end user perspective and New Zealand's reliance on that primary sector. Use of AI, gosh, I was in the first year at school that did computer studies. We did it for 12 months in 7th form. I never saw a computer in the entire 12 months. There was one computer in Wellington, it was in Datacom, it was a mainframe. So in my life, traversed from school, never seeing a computer, to thinking about AI. Gosh, that's not actually that long. It has to make a huge difference, both to the submitters of dossiers and information to make our jobs easier, but also to cut some of the drudgery and detail out of our work. We have highly technical people who spend probably an inordinate amount of time cutting, dicing, looking at data, reordering it, processing it, rather than looking into it and on it. So we think from our perspective, AI will certainly make a huge difference in our ability to get to the core of an application, to process it quickly, and to look at data from other jurisdictions. That's one of the key recommendations from the review from our perspective, is how do you get trusted regulators and how do you get access to their assessment, and then be able to hoover that up, and do you make that usable for our assessors? So we think that's a game changer. It will take care. Everyone's sort of wants the goodies, but they also don't want any big mistakes. So we do need to be careful. This, at the end of the day, is proprietary information. It's commercially sensitive information we're getting from you. So we need to make sure that we handle that carefully. So from an MPI perspective, one of the early use cases for AI will certainly be ACVM. Where it leads to, I don't know. It has to make a substantial difference, though. Thank you.
Allan, I know you're in close contact with your peers around the globe. What reflections do you have?
Thanks, Katherine. I'll just build on Vince's comments, where many of you will be coming from a scientific background and will have your integrity of your training. We're experimenting with AI now, and it's going to take a while for the scientists to get trust in that as they work through it. So we've got a number of sort of contained experiments as we're trying to use AI to synthesize a lot of the data we get. And for many of your substances, we might get 1,000 studies easily and thousands of pages to consider. And you'll say, well, why don't you look at the international regulators? So let's talk about those. US EPA is now sort of off the list for us, really. We have many friends in there that we trust and manage, but the political overlay of that makes it pretty difficult now for us to work with them. You come into Europe, and Europe has sort of two layers. It has a scientific layer where we do most of our work with, and then it has the political layer. So, glyphosate would be a good example of where the science may say something and then it gets into the French Parliament or some other parliament and suddenly the politics takes over. Our two major, if you like, companions are Australia and Canada. And as I say, we were really hopeful. We had a trip over to Australia. We've been building that relationship. They're coming here for the CTAC conference, which I think is in Te Papa, I think. Oh, no, it might be across the way at the convention centre. And now they're in the middle of a major restructure. So the teams that we were dealing with, because we hope to share assessment pathways as well and share the work between us. I won't talk about, we know about the queue. Thank you for some of you not mentioning it. But when we get our scientists underway and working, we find we're pretty comparable, and you've seen various reports about that. And I think the issue is how can the community and your organisations link up in a way that we don't do all the work over and over again. We have some particular challenges here. Use patterns, very different to broadacre farming and other stuff in Europe. Tonga species and treaty considerations are all things that feed in through our legislation. But I think there's really big opportunity, and I think the recommendations point to that, to allow us to get more of that done. But, the politics and the public sway on that, you may be aware we have a judicial review underway on our decision on glyphosate not to reassess it. We'll see where that goes next week. But, that's an example of where we've actually said this is a really important substance. We don't need to look at it again. Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah, Katherine, I wouldn't mind just touching on, building a little bit on what Allan said, but also just reflecting on the sort of question around balance, which is sat at the heart of sits at the heart of this whole conversation. So first of all, I think we're really conscious, we have to have a system, processes, provisions, law that enable productivity, and support productivity, must enable innovation. It's really fundamental to the way forward, and also has to be responsive. So be able to react more readily to changes in technology and the availability of new products. I think that's very much central to the direction, and I think Allan's touched on some of the most important changes that we're introducing, whether that's better leveraging international expertise or the conditional approvals pathway, investing in systems, modelling capability, speeding things up. I probably just want to emphasise that it obviously doesn't come, or has to come with proportionate safeguards, and that is always going to be fundamental, and there's always that risk that if you just miss that sweet spot in terms of that balance, then social license can be lost, and then you're in that state of regulatory flux, and you're reacting and you're lurching back to where you were. So just keeping the balance in mind, I think, is really important in terms of the stability and the durability of the system and certainty for the sector going forward. So just to make that point, that we just need to be mindful that we strike that balance and we hold to that sweet spot.
Yes, I understand the point you make about balance, and it is about balance, really the subject of the whole panel, balancing risk but one can never eradicate risk in its entirety. And just want to pick up on a comment made earlier, because science has to be fundamental in all decision making, and it's pretty concerning to hear reflections about the US. Really interested in that. Do you think that's going to be something that is right across many of the other regulatory positions? Is that what the regulators are thinking?
You want to go?
I'll start. It is quite scary, isn't it? Both seeing the erosion of capability in the US as federal changes and workforces are happening, but also the emergence of almost popularist views. I was reading the Make America Healthy Again report. If you read that, that's fascinating reading, but it just brings out these themes around aspartame and all sorts of, it's questioning products that have got safe, that are well known as safe, and there's a lot of history around them. But when you see that coming out of the White House, that really places regulators and scientists in a really difficult position. I don't think it's a conducive environment in America at the moment for fact, reason, science-based research, and for regulators, it's pretty tough. With people that we regularly deal with in the Food and Drug Authority, we can't find them. It's very hard to find them now. They're possibly gone. We had an audit recently from the US DA in New Zealand. In the course of why they're there, they were getting texts from home saying, do you want to take redundancy? So that very unsettling for these operators who are really crucial for our trade and our relationships. So yeah, it is concerning, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess the thing that concerns me as a retired scientist probably from a long time ago is the way the campaigns that we've seen in the US has spread, and they are here with social media. When I first joined the EPA, we used to have a sort of black joke: what week was it going to be? Glyphosate, 1080, seabed mining. Well, what was it that was going to dominate the media that we would spend most of the week on pushing back on? And we had very prominent politicians then, like Stephen Browning, anti-glyphosate. What we're concerned about from a scientific perspective is the misrepresentation of science. And I see my friend William Rolleston, who is heavily involved in the gene tech stuff, and we're seeing that occur now. I won't comment on any specifics, but some of the stuff that's coming out about gene tech is the same sort of issues. I'm often hit up at the odd barbecue about how can it be that we allow glyphosate to be used when the US courts and others have found against them. I point out it's the same system that found OJ innocent, so maybe we shouldn't rely on the US court system to give us scientific perspectives. But that's a pretty popular thing, and I would emphasise with Sam here, social licence is important, and you may be surprised to hear we're often defenders of your business and industry against others who would like to see quite a different shift in settings around environment and agriculture and the use of it. So I'm not making a plea for sympathy, but occasionally it's a rock and hard place.
But when you're making announcements and decisions based on science, do we as industry do enough to support the more controversial decisions, i.e. the ones where the campaigns are running rampant?
I don't think so, but that may be, look, I come from your world and I understand, particularly if you're a multinational, you have a parent office that may not like you to do certain things, but I think it's important that everyone stresses scientific. Particularly it's about risk. My PhD supervisor used to say it's not a random sample of the population that walk down dark alleys at night, the genetics of risk and the people's perception of risk is very complex, and for us to be able to explain the balance between the costs, benefits, risks and upsides, sometimes it's an impossible job, so we would welcome any help around that. And I realise public may look at your support cynically, but I wouldn't let that stop you. You play an important part in this economy.
It's not actually on our pre-agreed questions, but I was just thinking, as you know, formerly from the food industry, and FANZ does work extremely well as a trans-Tasman regulator. Do you think we'll ever get to a position where we share law or share a common approach with Australia?
I guess I'm someone who works in that system, and there's huge advantages, absolutely. It's one of the, I guess, real success stories of closer economic relations, the joint food system. But at the same time, you lose some sovereignty, and that's a feature of a joint system. It is often not agile and fast. And I guess you've seen in the last year, or last 6 months or so, when standard might depart from what New Zealand would like to do. So infant formula is a good example. So at the present, we're still sort of working our way through that. So that these shared systems are good until they're not. So you do lose sovereignty. It is slower. New Zealand does not have it's not a voice of two. The reality in the Trans-Tasman food system is that we're one of 10 voting ministers. So New Zealand has a voice of one of 10. A very different environment to what we have in New Zealand. At the moment, we have both EPA and ACVM as accessible, reasonably agile, I would argue, and customised to New Zealand. You haul that back over to Australia, you won't have those same features. Yeah.
Look, I think I fundamentally agree with Vince in that there's a spectrum, isn't there, of sort of joining up, whether that's Trans-Tasman or more generally, and I definitely think across a number of regulatory regimes there's lots of opportunities for joining up on standards, on science, common science, which unfortunately I did finish up after the fifth form, so I have relied on gut and instinct for decision making for quite a long time myself, so I will defer to my colleagues on the value of science and evidence. So there's a spectrum, and I think there's definitely opportunities in the standards and the common science, but joining up single regulators, you're trading off a lot at that point.
Interesting. The four of you have got a unique mountaintop view. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you think we in industry should be concerned about? What would you rate as some of the top risks that you see that perhaps we should be factoring into our strategies and our governance?
Having spent yesterday talking to a range of submitters on glyphosate, MRL standard, I can tell you that social licence for products is not to be taken as a given. There is an active and growing body which has mobilised itself, and it is attacking the industry really, and it's attacking the biggest, most widely used product globally from a herbicide perspective. And its belief systems are very deep. It's very hard to engage with them. We had a pretty robust conversation with a number of stakeholders yesterday. I had to sort of have a shower afterwards and calm down and things. But I think this is where the regulator can help maintain social licence for industry, because we can apply and use your data to give a imprimatur to a product and to assure the public that it is safe. That is increasingly more difficult, and I think we do need to be a bit more joined up on this. It has felt quite lonely, sort of being the voice that's defending a particular action, and the absence and silence of others sometimes is a bit deafening. Yeah.
Yes, I'd echo Vince's comments. I think it's a couple of things. Having spent nearly 12, 14 years in Wrightson, farming's very unique in agriculture industry, both in terms of the social aspects of it, but in terms of history and the science that goes into it. And a good part of New Zealand doesn't really understand it, except they find their milk on the table and their butter and everything else. And I think there is, you have a wave coming through here of really strong support for agriculture and other issues. But as Vince says, there is a wave underneath it as well. And yes, people will be cynical of you and your industry. And I would add, when I was at Wrightson, we made a lot of money out of your products, so thank you, through rural supplies. But I think stepping forward into that space is really important, because I just don't see that pressure coming off at all. And I also see some of these strategies coalescing both across countries as well. And we've held off the glyphosate issue now for the decade I've been in EPA. We've come very close to the one thing we don't want to do. There's two substances we don't want to do a reassessment of. One is glyphosate, the other is 1080. We're very comfortable where the regulatory system sits on both of those, but we could just imagine what that reassessment process could look like, and how it would allow social media and the types of issues that Vince is talking about coming out. So I just don't think you can take it for granted that I guess your place in the world's, protected. May have put that rather inarticulately, but yeah.
This morning at the APHANZ breakfast, there was a presentation of some research that had been done by Acumen, looking at how people, how respondents think about activism and whether or not it's okay to attack people either verbally or violently for a cause. And the percentage of particularly the age group 15 to 24 and even the middle age group that suggested it was perfectly okay to attack when in fact you were campaigning or being an activist on something was quite concerning. In terms of what you and your staff face, particularly when you're dealing with what should be science-based decisions, is that a concern to you as leaders? And how do you make sure your team remain safe?
I'll go first. We've had a relatively quiet period, particularly about 1080 and glyphosate, but we have another responsibility. It's called fast track, and it's very polarising. So we have to put security measures in place through the organisation. We're quite worried about. Fortunately, it's not easy to find us, and we don't have big signs up, but we are prepared in case we have issues involving staff and threatening behaviour. And so far, it's been okay. I mean, we do get some pretty weird letters and some pretty unusual approaches, but at the moment, it hasn't been physical. It was about a few years ago. We had a couple of incidents which was a bit scary, but we got through those. So yeah, I'm quite disturbed to hear that research. I don't know about you, Vince.
Look, I up until the recent experience, I haven't been so aware of some of that depth of feeling, but certainly the recent MRL consultation has highlighted for me. I've seen some of the submissions in writing, and I just think it's incredibly scary that people think they can say those sorts of things to public servants who are just doing their job. It is threatening and quite frightening, and our people shouldn't have to put up with it, frankly. You could make a reasonable submission, but you should not threaten people or their families. So we are going to have to probably take this more seriously. it's interesting. We in Wellington we're in 2 buildings. The bulk of MPI is in Charles Ferguson, which has no, just basic security. It's got a reception and a sort of a front desk and a front door. But my team is based in MB, where there's security guards, and it's quite unusual for us to experience security guards. And that's because of MB, they deal with a lot of resource issues and mining and those sorts of things, so they're far more attuned to it. But up until now, I've thought, gosh, that's just we don't need those security guards. What a waste of time. But actually, right at the moment, I'm quite pleased that we do, because they do provide a level of security. And for me, it's important that I'm happy to take, it's my name publicly. I don't want our staff names out there. So I will sort of front it. I'm not having my staff front it with their names. So if someone comes calling, I'd rather they come calling to me rather than to our frontline staff. Yeah.
I'll just do a couple of quick comments because I think it's been relatively well traversed. But I mean, I spent some time in the social services sector, and the level of abuse and threats that were very significant to myself, my family, and my staff were incredibly distressing. So we had to take numbers of measures. I suppose the thing for me is, New Zealand's a relatively small population. And you, as the population, want the best people in the public service. And actually, the level of abuse that a range of public servants, at actually a very, as Vincent said, sometimes a relatively low level. It's not always just, the leaders. Look, if you saw some of the stuff I saw, you would be absolutely horrified. And the fact is that we are a small population. You're not going to be able to bring lots of people in here to do those jobs. So, I suppose what I think, the public can do and what people like yourself can do is they keep looking at the facts and the science. Try not to get lazy and just go, oh, look at all those useless X's or Y's or, at the end of the day, these are people with families, and actually we want the best people serving the public, and I think we have some tremendous people serving the public. What worries me is the long-term ability to attract those tremendous people to the public service when, the treatment on physically, verbally, and on social media does not inspire you to want to get up every morning sometimes and do the job. So anything that you can do, and the key thing for me is don't just get lazy and agree with the person who is presenting a view that is factually incorrect or factually unfounded, and is just having a go and playing the person and not understanding the issue.
I'll have a quick go too. Look, in this space, I'm looking at my team. I don't feel like it's been something that's really been at the edge or that confronting in terms of engagement with the public. But put my climate hat on, and climate can generate some pretty divergent and strong views, and there have been moments, I think, where things have been a little bit difficult and there's been quite a lot of discomfort on the part of staff, maybe during a consultation process, that kind of thing. So that's definitely something that we need to, we're constantly thinking about in terms of how we go about our job. I would say I feel like there is a bit of a strategic challenge too for the likes of APHANZ and other industry bodies and membership-based bodies, just trying to work out how far you step into that conversation. So there's lots of sources of fact and fiction out there, and I think lots of different organisations, institutions, parts of the system have some responsibility for trying to moderate and manage some of what's happening at the fringe. And so I'm sure it's probably something that has popped up in board conversations or at the strategic level for yourselves, and it's not an easy thing to do or reach a judgment around how far do we step into this thing, because there's some risk in getting too involved. But at the same time, if we let the system fracture too much and be too influenced by wide-ranging and not necessarily well-founded views, then it's going to create a fairly difficult future, I think, for all of us.
I agree. I call it healthy friction. It's our role to continue to have courageous conversations on behalf of our members to make sure that the regulatory environment's fit for purpose. Look, we've talked about constraints, we've talked about the law, we've talked about resourcing of departments. Are you confident over a period of time we can make some changes to ensure that our farmers, our producers and all those who are reliant on products and treatments coming to New Zealand can have access to the innovation that their Northern Hemisphere counterparts or competitors can?
As one of the kind of, as independent to the regulators, I think, so I've answered that question with a yes. And the why is because actually the work that has been done, actually everybody has ownership of. There's clear responsibilities, there's clear recommendations, there's a clear plan that's actually been approved and endorsed by not just the 3 ministers who need to lead it, but actually the entire cabinet. And I think, both Vince and Allan have actually pulled out some of the key recommendations that they feel are game changers. Ministers also have asked us as the ministry to, report back and give an independent view of implementation progress. So I think are all the right settings in place to deliver a level of change? Is there a significant commitment? Yes.
I'll answer your question, Katherine. I think absolutely have to. I mean, New Zealand will not get to its growth objectives by continuing to use the same products that we have in the past. So we absolutely must. The challenge is how do we get those products out of queues and into priorities? I was very taken by Bill English's comments around use the evidence, what the return on investment is, perhaps use an intermediary. I mean, the current date stamp system, so the application comes through, it's not literally, but it's date stamped, and that's how we deal with it. We find wholly unsatisfying. It is the only thing we have available. If the industry were to give us a prioritised list, we'd welcome it. So we need to find some way of cutting through the dross and pulling out those really essential products. We hear a lot about them, but actually we need to get the detail on them, and we need help to actually say it's these 30 products that you need to bring to the front of the queue. We gladly do that, but we don't have, as Bill said, we don't have the information to do that, but the industry actually does.
Just before Allan and Sam, I'm going to open to the floor for some questions. So while you're thinking about your questions, and we'll have some roving mics, Liz has got one, and I think there's another one down the back too.